By the evening of October 24th, 1415, Henry V's army had reached the area around Agincourt. The English were exhausted after weeks of marching. Disease had reduced their numbers. Food was scarce. Yet despite their condition, they still stood between France and Calais. The French believed they had finally trapped their enemy. During the night, both armies prepared for battle. The field between them was narrow, squeezed between the woods of Tramecourt and Agincourt. Recent rain had soaked the freshly ploughed ground, turning much of the battlefield into heavy mud. Neither side yet realized how important that mud would become. At dawn, Henry deployed his army. The English lines stretched across the narrow opening between the forests. In the centre stood roughly 900 to 1,000 men-at-arms. These were heavily armoured soldiers fighting on foot. Henry himself took position among them. On both wings stood thousands of longbowmen under the supervision of Sir Thomas Erpingham. Before the battle, the archers hammered sharpened wooden stakes into the ground at an angle. Any cavalry charge would have to pass through this barrier first. Across the field, the French army formed in depth. The vanguard contained approximately 4,800 dismounted men-at-arms. Behind them stood a second line of around 3,000 more. Additional forces waited further back. On each side of the vanguard stood about 600 dismounted men-at-arms. Ahead of these formations were selected mounted men-at-arms, perhaps 800 to 1,200 in total, assigned a specific mission: charge the English archers, scatter them, and clear the way for the infantry assault. For several hours neither army moved. The French were waiting for additional troops and believed time favoured them. Henry understood that waiting would only worsen his situation. His men were hungry, tired, and outnumbered, so he made a bold decision. He ordered the entire English army forward. Slowly the line advanced several hundred yards. The archers pulled up their stakes, carried them closer to the enemy, and planted them again. This movement brought the French within effective longbow range. Then the arrows began. Thousands of bowstrings snapped. A storm of arrows arced across the sky and crashed into the French front. The longbow's true strength was not necessarily penetrating plate armour. Rather, it disrupted formations, wounded horses, forced men to keep their visors closed, and created confusion before contact. Unable to remain under fire, the French cavalry launched its attack. Several hundred mounted men-at-arms accelerated toward the English wings. Almost immediately, the terrain began working against them. The muddy ground robbed the horses of speed. Formations lost cohesion. Arrows struck men and mounts. Horses stumbled or panicked. Others crashed into neighbouring riders. By the time the survivors reached the English position, they faced the rows of sharpened stakes protecting the archers. The attack failed. Even worse, many of the retreating horsemen rode back directly into their own advancing infantry, increasing the disorder already spreading through the French line. Now the main French assault began. Nearly 5,000 dismounted men-at-arms from the vanguard advanced toward the English centre. The distance was not enormous, but the conditions were terrible. Each man wore heavy armour and weapons. Every step sank into mud. The narrow battlefield compressed the formation. Men crowded together shoulder to shoulder. Those in the rear continued pushing forward, making the front ranks even denser. The French finally reached the English line. The collision was tremendous. For a time, the pressure of numbers pushed parts of the English centre backward. Contemporary accounts suggest this was the most dangerous moment for Henry's army. The French vanguard had survived the march across the field and now brought its weight against the English men-at-arms. But the battlefield was becoming a trap. The tightly packed French ranks could barely manoeuvre. Men who fell into the mud struggled to stand. Others stumbled over bodies. The second French line began advancing behind the first, creating even more congestion. Space disappeared. Breathing became difficult. Swinging weapons became difficult. Maintaining formation became nearly impossible. Then came the decisive phase. Many English archers had exhausted much of their ammunition. Instead of remaining behind the line, they dropped their bows and entered the fight. Armed with axes, mallets, knives, and swords, they attacked the flanks of the densely packed French formation. The French men-at-arms were already exhausted from the advance through mud and the crush of bodies. Now they faced attacks from multiple directions. The vanguard began to break. As it collapsed, the second French line encountered the same obstacles: mud, congestion, fallen men, and determined English resistance. What should have been an overwhelming numerical advantage became a liability. More soldiers only meant more bodies crowded into the same narrow space. By late morning, the battle was effectively decided. Thousands of French nobles and men-at-arms were dead or captured. The English line still stood. Then a new threat emerged. A French force attacked the English baggage area in the rear. Fearing that another French assault might coincide with a prisoner uprising, Henry issued one of the most controversial orders of his reign. Many French prisoners were to be killed. The order was later halted, but it remains one of the most debated episodes of the battle. When the fighting finally ended, Agincourt had become one of the most famous victories in military history. The English had not won because the longbow alone was a miracle weapon. They had won because terrain, mud, battlefield width, defensive preparation, disciplined deployment, and French overcrowding combined into a catastrophe for the attacking army. Modern historians increasingly emphasize these factors alongside the effectiveness of the longbow itself. News of the victory spread rapidly across Europe. In England, church bells rang in celebration. Noblemen praised the king, chroniclers recorded the battle, and Henry's reputation soared to heights few rulers ever achieved. For the French, Agincourt was a disaster. For Henry, it was the moment he became a legend. More than 600 years later, the battle remains one of the most studied engagements of the Middle Ages, and one of history's greatest examples of a smaller force defeating a larger one through leadership, discipline, and battlefield conditions. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more stories from history's greatest battles. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.